early days, it's like you're flying a biplane and you can stick your head out the window and kind of know what direction and you're turning that plane left or right. But at some point you are flying a 787 and you can't rely on that. You have to rely on instrumentation. Otherwise you're going to crash the plane. And you have to trust not your senses. You got to trust the instruments. And I would draw an analogy. You also have to, in a real company, you also have to get the qualitative, kind of dig in deep. But you have to have things well instrumented. Otherwise, you can't keep up with all the things that are happening.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peter Davis, managing partner of Interplay. On this podcast, I interview innovators about their strategies, industries, and decisions. This week, I chat with Vivek Sharma, co-founder and CEO of Movable Ink. Now, Movable Ink has created a marketing solution that helps brands work data into personalizing content. Basically, they help businesses leverage their data to help customize content and marketing messages. And it works. I think it's no surprise that when companies switch from a one-size-fits-all marketing model to customized content, they tend to see large increases in engagement. Vivek started his career as an engineer and salesman, making him a bit of a double threat as a startup founder. During this chat, we discuss the ins and outs of Movable Ink, some important lessons he's learned while growing the company and adding so many employees, his perspective on capitalizing startups, and much, much more. He also takes a minute to share a startup horror story about when a change in Gmail's policies almost made their entire product obsolete. Enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Bowery Legal. Bowery Legal provides a complete range of legal services to high-growth companies. They do everything from formation, employment, partnership agreements, stock grants, corporate matters, and venture capital and debt financings. If you're interested in learning more, visit bowerylegal.com. Vivek, what's up, man? Thanks for being on the show today.
What's going on? Good to see you, Mark.
All right. Well, let's start this off. Do you mind giving a quick, 30-second, 60-second background on who you are? And then we'll jump into the company.
Yeah, I'm Vivek Sharma. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Movable Ink. And I grew up in Massachusetts, lived out in Silicon Valley, Bay Area right after school, worked in some interesting companies. Cisco Systems, the first year I was out of school, a company called Blue Martini Software, which was a CRM pioneer. I was an engineer. I wrote code, core engineering team, and that was what I did for a bunch of years. And then a couple of weird left and right turns took me into a sales role in a couple of companies. So diametrically opposite of all of that. And then that kind of led me some years ago, I think the end of 2010, which is around when we met, to start Movable Ink. And I think we actually met in a precursor of Movable Ink that failed, thankfully.
Yes.
So Movable Ink could arise out of the ashes.
Yes, you're one of those founders with some scar tissue, but you turned it into something fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's the way to do it. You got to fail a little bit.
Do
you want to give an overview of Movable Ink, just so people know what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So every single business, especially enterprises, wants to put the customer at the center of everything, of all their marketing. But people are moving through different steps of their journey, through different devices and the channel of their choosing. And these big businesses have made investments in data, organizing their data, and they often have a messaging platform, usually channel specific. So email marketing, SMS marketing, et cetera. But what they haven't really thought about is that people don't experience data, they experience content. So what's missing is all of these channels, great targeting, great segmentation. It doesn't work if everyone's getting a generic piece of content on the other side. So Movable Ink taps into any data source a company has, it activates it, and we generate the perfect personalized content for every individual on the other side of a marketing communication. And we work with some of the biggest companies in the world, 700 of the biggest brands, everyone from E-Trade to Hilton to trying to remember which ones I can say and not say. We've got every major airline in the US except for one. We've got 5 of the largest 10 consumer banks in the world, on and on. So some of the biggest companies you've heard
Big
of.
enterprises. Big enterprises.
For the most part, but we have a really new and thriving mid-market business as well. So these are the D2C brands, the fast-moving companies, the disruptors that are showing up.
Okay, so could you take the product and break it down just a little bit? So it's customizing the content. Is there a specific channel? Are we talking an email medium or text? And how does it change?
So we started out in email. So the initial premise started out in email. You'd put a little block of HTML with an image tag inside it. And the moment the email opened, this is like 9-10 years ago, we'd be able to detect contextual factors like the weather outside, time of day, the device that you're on, and tailor the right content for you. We generate the image on the fly and show you that. And then fast forward 5 or 6 years later, what we learned was that enterprises have lots of great data assets. It could be APIs that they built. It could be CSV files. It could be the dozen data platforms or other marketing technologies. And we tap into all of those. And that's where the real value started to be seen on the Movable Ink platform. And we could, generate the perfect loyalty message for you by tapping into CrowdTwist and showing that, when an email gets sent out and personalized after it is sent, we show you what loyalty tier that you're on. Based on your zip code, there could be a weather-based offer. We might know your recent behaviors on the website. You added something to a basket, you search something, and that auto-populates into the email. So 1 million people getting a communication get 1 million perfect, unique experiences based on data about them or the state of the business. And we started out in email, but now mobile push notifications, we're powering those. We're doing marketing content inside mobile, and we're exploring lots of new channels like SMS, landing pages, digital signage, on and on.
And so it sounds like it's less about the real-time adjustment of the content as it might have been in the beginning, and more about leveraging the data behind the scenes to customize accordingly.
Yeah, if you dig into the marketer's workflow, they spend weeks and months just trying to get the data together, organize it, plan their campaigns, and it makes it very hard for them to pivot quickly. So the weeks and months that happened before, suddenly you put a piece of content that is sometimes even evergreen in your marketing campaign, and after it sends, somewhere between the send and when it gets opened, it generates it all, pulling from the data sources and assembling the whole thing to be the perfect thing that you see. So it's a big workflow benefit. People save a ton of time and there's a lot of things they don't have to do anymore with once they're using Movable Ink. And it's a better customer experience because everything's personalized to that individual in ways that were impossible before.
What kind of lift do people see when they switch from one size fits all to customization? Is there kind of an industry standard on how much our conversion improves?
Yeah, it completely varies. We've had companies elevate their revenue anywhere from 10 to north of 100%. We've had click-through rates. Forrester did a total economic impact study, 373% increase in engagement, and I believe a 40% reduction in production cycles. And over and over, we see that kind of thing happening with our customers that are seeing more revenue, more orders placed, reducing the cycle to assemble emails. And it's also enabling ideas that were never possible before, right? We have a company that does offers inside. It's a big financial services firm. There was no way they could plug in this API and have millions of versions of an email generated. And simply being able to do that was a huge win for this company. And that entire program runs on Movable Ink.
So you make it sound like this was an easy thing to put together. You guys are a big team and a big company. What makes this dynamic use of data so complicated? Why is this so hard for folks?
Yeah, the legacy MarTech companies, it's a pretty complex product. First, the data sits in all sorts of places. So you'd think we're in a world today and we thought this when we first started the company, and that's why we didn't focus on a lot of the data companies were already managing, because we thought that was a solved problem. It turns out it wasn't. They've got a data warehouse and a CDP and a CRM, and they're still passing around CSV files. And their website might be a source of data. We actually have some technology that can change a web page into a RESTful API. So all the stuff is scattered in different places. To be able to assemble it, to transform it, to get it ready for marketing, and then to even figure out, how do I generate content? You might have amazing targeting in 100 different segments, but your marketing team isn't going to be able to keep up with the production costs of generating 100 unique pieces of content. And so we say, let's just generate it for you. We build a technology that can take the data, activate it, and generate that perfect content for every single individual. So that was the hard part. That was a problem companies really bring us in to solve.
It's interesting when you're talking about all these siloed data sets that you're aggregating. I think that my gut's telling me, I'm assuming there's some sort of professional services component to this. How much are you guys involved with helping people get organized through your tool in order to allow them to use the tool? Is that a part of the game here, or can you flip a switch?
Well, especially in the early days, people didn't really know how to think about, it was sometimes we describe Movable Ink as a Swiss Army knife. Well, if you've got all these tools, what can you do with it? It's hard to even explore the types of ideas. So from day one, we invested in a client services team. We call it the client experience team. We have a client strategy team as well. Someone we both know, Allison Lindland, who you introduced me to many years ago, runs that client strategy team. She's wonderful. And has built an exceptional team. And they're industry thought leaders. So there's a retail expert in a whole retail team, a financial services team, a travel and hospitality team, on and on. And we help our customers come up with these ideas, know what their strategies are, what kinds of data sets that they have at their disposal, and how do you turn this into ideas and use cases that make a lot of sense and have a high impact. And, there's a technology piece of it, but I feel like a big differentiator for us is our services and strategies that we also bring to our clients that they wouldn't be able to perhaps come up with on their own. So we're a great sounding board for that and catalyst for coming up with cool things.
That is so important for an enterprise scale business like this. But it's funny, when most people set out as entrepreneurs in the tech world to start a company, it's the last thing they're thinking about, right? They're out thinking about how they're going to automate everything A to Z. They're going to build this, self-serve, self-sustaining technology. But a lot of successful companies require this type of division. Any tips for folks who are entering a space where they're thinking customer success or, I like the phrase customer experience. Folks are going to have to come in and help. Any tips for how to think about how to set that up, or ratios of how many people you need per client? How do you think about modeling out this operation and kind of get into this?
Yeah, and it's funny, maybe every company doesn't need a client services team. And I think if you're serving small business, it's a little bit more. Usually what you see with a small business software, MailChimp's a pretty good example. Usually the enterprises are the first to adopt something really new. It's expensive, it's complex to do things. But when there's a well-established set of processes and people know exactly what they're looking to get out of it, then the mid-market market adopts it, then small business, and you can have people log in and know what they're trying to accomplish. So Salesforce did this to Siebel, MailChimp did this to, the Cheetah Mails and the Epsilons from way back. However, you kind of have to fit into the mold of how this small business software firm does it. Enterprises have really disparate data. They've got different workflows. They've built layers and layers of things over the years, and they're all a little bit different. And so if you try to solve everyone's problem and put the solution in the product, you've got something that's so convoluted and hard to use, impossible to use. And some enterprise software turns out like that they just shove everything in there. So I think what we strive for is get 80% of that functionality in there and rely on get a good client services team that can do the last 20% or 10% and tailor it. And so it's really a platform you have to build with the best practices and make it easy for that last mile to happen, whether it's no code or writing code, whoever you're building for. And I was an engineer, as an engineer starting a company, you don't want to hire salespeople or client services people, and you think everything can happen with code. And it's until you've lived in that world and talked to customers, and I had the benefit of living in the sales world for a while, you realize what an important part these people play in salesperson navigating complex hierarchies within companies and client services people being able to come up with 1,000 ideas and quickly iterate, right? You talking to your customer, that happens way faster than what you can bake into the product. And you can just kind of cherry pick the most interesting ideas and the patterns that are reoccurring, put those in your product, but then give the team the freedom to do innovative things that might be a little bit more bespoke.
How are you thinking about success for the client services side of the world?
Success meaning, how do we know our client services people are being successful?
Yeah, that the operation's working and you're nailing it. How do you think about that?
Yeah, it is really understanding what the metrics our clients are tracking and making sure we're aligned to it. And it isn't imagination or hallucination that's happening here. So really establishing what does success look like, and every client could be a little bit different. For some people, it could be redeeming an offer as a success. For an e-commerce merchant, selling off their unprofitable, discounting some things that they've excess supply for. So we do that in the sales process even, and make sure the client services team really understands that, and there's a good baton pass. and measure yourself against it. Have regular conversations. What are we trying to achieve? Where are we trying to get to over the course of a year or two? And do we have a game plan that is, and measuring ourselves against that? So that is about the client success. And then internally, of course, as a SaaS company, we look at the gross and net retention metrics, and when are we upselling, and are we getting greater usage of our product? Are people doing more sophisticated or advanced things with our product? And we look at a ton of data. These are all indicators that we're heading in the right direction. And we have the data to see what the patterns are, what we have to get, what steps we have to get people through in order for them to be successful. And it's not always the thing that just pops into the client's head, the thing that they want. And I think a little bit of a trust has to be built to allow a vendor to lead the way and at least share what's worked before, what kinds of themes have worked before and what hasn't.
Now, your superpower, looking at your background, I mean, obviously you have engineering roots, but you've also got this sales capability. And now you've built a large sales force, I assume. How many people on your sales team?
Probably over 100 people.
Yeah, that's a good size organization.
Yeah.
What have you figured out? I mean, it's enterprise. I'm assuming you guys are doing field sales. What are some of the things you've learned along the way where you're like, hey, this is what everyone needs to know if they're going to make this work, that you didn't know maybe when you started on this journey?
Yeah. And I would say I'm a generalist, and I'm very happy that way more talented salespeople and sales managers have joined the company since then to take it to the next level. But I think the good thing to do as a founder is to wear some of these different hats. So you feel the pain, you're in those conversations. And so the early days was me stumbling around with our first rep, second rep, and doing it in maybe not the best way possible, but learning enough about the kind of person I'm looking for to be able to lead that function. And so it is, from 0 to, let's say, 1 million, 2 million in ARR, the founder's got to be pretty close to the sales process and understand what's working, because a lot of what your customer is saying is going to make it into your marketing materials, into your sales deck. Mm-hmm. So the tight connectedness, I think that's the advantage we have as founders, that because you can't hire anyone, you're doing the pitch deck, you're writing the marketing copy on the website, you are the product manager also figuring out what features to build. And these things feel very tightly coupled and connected. But of course, you have to start to specialize this stuff. So the next wave, there's a step function, you shift up to the next gear, and player coach type of sales leader who's out there selling for themselves, but also cultivating a team. And they're creating a little bit more professionalism and standards in the process. And for us, 0 to 20 million in ARR was that point that worked pretty well. But suddenly that starts to break down, and you've got to step up to the next level, which is a little bit more of a hierarchical sales team selling. It's not just a seller. We have a partner salesperson. There's specialization for the BDRs who are generating the leads. There's marketing, product marketing stuff they need. There's collateral, kill sheets, one-pagers, references. And so it really takes a team to be able to sell effectively at the highest level. And that machine starts to look pretty different too. And the same person who was successful in the early days isn't necessarily the person who can make it to the next level. It's great if that happens, but just recognizing that change, that the company is going through a transition. And when I've seen a lot of other SaaS companies, and these stall points seem to happen, and I know what they're hitting at that point and where they are sort of stalling out. And we've learned things the hard way. I think New York tech was younger in terms of technology companies. You and I are both been here a while when you could fit everyone into a bar that was in New York tech. And now I don't even know. I mean, it's second biggest place we're in of VC in the US. So there's a lot of, I think there's a generational shift that's even happened in New York, and a lot of that knowledge and learnings, that's only good for the ecosystem, right? The next time around, people are doing it smarter.
Okay. So there's these breaking points in companies. We all know this, where old process, communication styles have to go out the window. You found any rules of thumb for how to identify when systems are going to start breaking? Any guidance on that?
You can feel it. I mean, if you're measuring things, I wrote an email to my company in the early days, which was early days. It's like you're flying a biplane, and you can stick your head out the window and kind of know what direction, and you're turning that plane left or right. But at some point, you are flying a 787, And you can't rely on that. You have to rely on instrumentation. Otherwise, you're going to crash the plane. And you have to trust not your senses. You got to trust the instruments. And I would draw an analogy. You also have to, in a real company, you also have to get the qualitative, kind of dig in deep. But you have to have things well instrumented. Otherwise, you can't keep up with all the things that are happening. So the difference when you're 10 people sitting around a table, everyone knows every single deal, everyone knows every problem, every objection. It's easy to get everyone on the same page. But as you start to scale, knowledge gets a little bit more siloed, and communication, there's just a lot of different nodes to hop. And so that starts to become more complex. And if you instrument things well, you can start to catch things like something's off in this one area, or this new region's a problem, or retention's a problem here, or we seem to be spending a lot of marketing dollars over here and not getting the results. That gives you a little bit of that early warning indicator that, hey, we got to dig in deep. Let's drill down on that. So, we have a KPI report. I look for the top 10 things that are outperforming and ask, should we triple down on that thing? And the bottom 10%, like what's underperforming? And should we keep doing that? Or is there something that has to be urgently fixed in that area? You can't look at everything, but if you have a process kind of like that, things bubble up that are working really well, and the problem points kind of reveal themselves where you have to focus.
Okay, so larger organization, you got to move to data and dashboards. You've got your mid-level management coming in, your experts who are whiz kids at sales or marketing or this whole stuff. What's the, is there a thing that you picked up from your sales leadership that you brought in to level up your organization? Something you learned where you're like, wow, okay, awesome. Didn't see that coming. There any big insight that came out of watching these pros come in and build that?
Yeah, and I have to give credit. I think in New York, we didn't have, Salesforce is not here in New York at that scale. I know they have an office here and everything now, but back then, you didn't have these companies that had reached $500 million in ARR, $1 billion in ARR, that you could hire people from that were leaving that could teach you how to do it. And as it turned out, the Movable Ink way of doing things was a little different. This is not a sale that, hey, I have an ESP over here. Let's go switch over to a different ESP. And you can hire people who've been in that industry. You really have to sit down. It's a new type of product, a new way of using it. And so we needed creative thinkers. So we were successful in promoting from within. So the people who lead our sales organization, our president and chief client officer right now, started out as our VP of customer success about 8 years ago. We made him our CRO, and now our chief revenue officer now started out as the first seller doing upsells for the company. And I gave him a ridiculous target to hit. I think I wasn't good at setting targets in the early days. You're picking some numbers out of thin air and people are excited, but amazingly, he exceeded that target with 7 or 8 months in the year. I gave him a 2 million target, and I think he hit 2.7 million in that first year. And I'm not saying that's advisable every single time, but you don't know. And he has proven we throw more opportunity at him. Run a small team, killed it running the small team. Go take over all of upsells, killed it there, and now is our chief revenue officer. And he has been, I'd say, the credit to anyone who's quickly gotten to that next level. They're learning machines, right? They're just picking up new things. They aren't falling back on a dogma of this is how we did it way back then. And they're constantly revisiting because they perhaps haven't done that before. Same with our VP of North American sales. Started out, I met his mother at a VC's event, sitting at the dinner table, and her son wanted to get into startups. He was a lawyer. He came in as a BDR, right? First, on paper, this just didn't make sense. And a later stage company would probably not even clear him past recruiting. But that's the great thing about startups, right? You can kind of get in there and prove yourself. And he killed it, has gone through multiple levels, is now our VP of North American sales, came in as a BDR. So there's a lot of stories like that over and over at Movable Ink. And it's keep an eye on talent, keep an eye on people who learn quickly, and keep throwing more at them, more responsibility, more latitude in how they do things, unconventional thinking. And you might be surprised at the great stuff that produces. So you asked a question about what did we learn? I think for us, bringing partners into the equation, 20 years ago, if you're doing enterprise software enterprise sales, every company was very sharp-elbowed. So if you buy from Oracle, they want to sell you everything from Oracle. If you buy from Adobe, you got to buy everything from there. and there's no room for partners. And we flipped the model and said, let's embrace every partner, even ones I thought were competitive in the early days. And we'd find a win-win solution where the thing that they do is complementary. They've got a unique data asset, and how can we build a unique content experience? And so we've done thousands of integrations. We work with hundreds of technology companies and probably partner better than any SaaS company I've ever seen. And that was an unconventional thing, right? We didn't, we learned by someone advocating for it. We had a great partner leader, and Adam Stambleck, our president, recognized that that was a unique opportunity. And other companies now are kind of borrowing that playbook.
And so the idea with a partner is you're going to integrate with their technology, maybe package something, and then their existing relationship is now a place where you can sell your product in. Is that?
Yeah. If you, if you want to steal this idea, if you go to exchange.movableink.com, you'll see all these great partner integrations, the use case. There's sometimes videos of like what the integration looks like, and it's all productized in the product. So, that's an example. And we have a team that will vet which partnerships make sense. Our business development team set the rules of engagement, will prioritize them. And then we have a partner sales team that goes into execution mode and works with the salespeople on the other side and our own salespeople and pitches these joint solutions. Because data is kind of the fuel for what makes Movable Ink work.
Right. So you're finding data companies mostly, and then trying to layer your technology on top and have them help promote it into their into their customer base.
That's right? So recommendations like rich relevance, Certona, loyalty like CrowdTwist, loyalty data like CrowdTwist, Pega for next best action, kind of the brain of your company, Curate, social data. So on, and it can, it ends up being a win-win for each company.
That's awesome. Great advice. Now you guys have, and maybe the internet is wrong and lying, and I think it probably is, but Crunchbase says you guys have raised about $40 million.
Yep, that's about right.
And for the scale of the company, that's not a crazy amount based on your headcount. You guys are, on LinkedIn, you're clocking over 400 folks now. Is that right?
Yeah, we're about 430 people now.
Right. So did you have a unique view or perspective on how to capitalize the company? Any wisdom for entrepreneurs who kind of when not to take money or when to? Something you figured out?
Yeah, and I give credit to, my parents too. I grew up in India, lived there till I was 8 years old. And I think a little bit of an ethic of trying to make a dollar stretch. And we came over here with $1,000 and a couple suitcases back in 1983. And, that was sort of, anything that is waste was just like really, it was just unaccepted. And I have to give credit to one of our board members, Matt Gorin at Contour Ventures, very similar philosophically. So it wasn't like, hey, I want to raise $100 million and throw money into everything. It was always test your way into it, get enough capital to do what you want to do. It forces you to have a clear game plan. Don't just say, I'm going to spend it on marketing. Exactly what are you going to go spend it on?
Right.
How do you test if that's working effectively? And then how do you scale that investment? And then our CFO, John Herman. So I think the three of us somehow a little bit of an alignment on it's okay to spend more money, but we should be really clear at this point on what's that return on that investment, and knowing where the dollars go and tracking those metrics and making sure we don't kind of backslide and just so easy to kind of shoot money out there and see it go into nothing and waste it. And then you're in a tough spot if you want to raise your next round.
So you don't have a private jet?
No. Do you want to send me one?
Yeah,
I'll do this podcast with you, Mark, if you send me one.
There we go. In the air. We had Maureen Farrell on, who's now at the New York Times, talking about WeWork. She wrote a book on that.
Yeah.
And
it's a cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
You have the WeWork culture. I think we've all read about it and seen it in the news. And contrast that with the Amazon culture, the famous story of like buying doors and nailing them down and turning them into desks. It sends a message too to the employees, and it's setting a cultural tone. And other people start to embrace it and understand what's important at a company, to measure things, to know what matters, to track progress. And it creates the right discipline as you get to be a much bigger company and people know how things are done.
Sounds like it's at every layer of the organization. I mean, having a great investor like Matt Gorin, who's got this perspective as well, reinforcing how you feel about it. That's you're kind of baking it in. through the
Yeah.
whole
And look,
system.
there are moments in time early on. I get it as an entrepreneur. You're like, if someone would just give me that $5 million check, I promise I'll be disciplined. It causes some pain, right? There's trade-offs you make early on. There's things, but you can only say that in retrospect. I can only say that in retrospect, which is it was good for us. That learning that you couldn't have gotten without really understanding how efficient this thing can be, what makes it really tick. We wouldn't have gotten it if we had raised 3 times as much capital.
Right. Now you've kind of built this the old school way, trial by fire. Your whole career, you've been working your way through the ranks. You know, everything's probably been new at some level at every stage of the game. It's not like you were under, someone's wing who had done this many times before or otherwise, or had followed a couple startups through to exit and then done it. What's been the hardest part of the journey for you so far?
For all the entrepreneurs who are struggling and kind of wondering if the struggle gets better later on, I'd say the hardest part definitely is getting to product market fit. There's just so much uncertainty. You have limited capital, whether you have a spouse, husband, wife, whatever. You're just watching your bank balance deplete. You're not even sure if you're on the right path, if you're going in the wrong direction. If you have to pivot, there's a sunk cost. Like, it's just really personally tolling. You don't know if you're doing the right things or not. And so things get better. They're good problems to have after that point. It doesn't mean you won't have other existential threats or new things thrown at you, but it's not that feeling like, wow, this grind, this might end up being nothing. You're constantly waking up in the early days with like, after this week, this might be nothing. We might be dead as a company. And you're default dead, right? You're trying to prove to the world this company deserves to be alive.
I love
and
that.
After product market fit, you start to feel that a little bit. And although there are challenges and things, and you might have slower growth or something else may happen, they're generally all solvable problems if you have the breathing room because you've got some capital in the bank, hopefully, to be able to tackle it. So there's early days. I will say later days, the stress can be, you can carry yourself psychologically through something, but you're also thinking about how 430 people or however you have to carry everyone else forward to, or you have to communicate clearly what some of these challenges are and invite conversation. And it becomes more about not just calling a direction going, but communication just becomes everything as you get to those later stages.
So as you think about the journey along the way, are there any anecdotes or stories that you tell at dinner parties? Like what's the movable ink narrative when you're trying to get a laugh or bring people into the moment?
A laugh or a cry? Back in 2013, we power email marketing and our stuff dynamically loads inside emails. Right after Black Friday that year, and I think this was like 1.5 weeks after it, suddenly our content started breaking in email, and we had no idea why. We got like a deliverability consultant and trying to figure out if we're setting things up the wrong way. Then a blog post arrived on Google's website, maybe another couple of weeks later. They had rolled out a fix to start caching content and proxying it. And literally, if there's an image, everyone would see the same version of that image. And so it would break the movable ink content. All right. And, by this point, we were, 2013, maybe we were a 70-person company, 80 people, meaningful size and real customers, real revenues and big enterprises. And people were really worried. They didn't know what was going on. We're trying to dig into it. And on the one hand, you could say, well, Google's only 30% of our opens or something, and it'll still work for everyone else.
That's the rug getting pulled out from under you.
Yeah, that is a big deal. So it was unclear. Then we learned Google changed something, and we realized we had to talk to Google. We just have to and find a way. So I asked all of our investors. Nothing really came of it. No one even knew who was responsible for Gmail at Google. And the person we both know, Alison Lindland, somehow in her network, she knows, I think, a third of the planet, found a path. At least. Found a path to the product manager, for Gmail. And that guy was willing to give us a 20-minute meeting, me and Michael. So I've never prepped for a meeting as thoroughly as this one here. And so Michael, my co-founder, our CTO, and I prepped a pitch deck. And Google was doing this for good reasons, for privacy and security. And we felt we could provide a fix that would meet Google's needs, but still deliver a better consumer experience where people can see kind of unique content. I call it the ugliest pitch deck you've ever seen, because we stripped it down, made it totally ugly, because we said it's going to be circulated with the engineering team, and we can't look too salesy on this. So this has to be something only an engineer could love and not feel like they're being sold to. So we did that, had the meeting, gave them an example of a technical fix, passed this no cache header inside the images and override it, and they can still get the IP masking and mask the user agent, things like that. And then crickets. Nothing happened. We didn't hear anything. A couple more months, getting really nervous. And I end up hearing about this group called MAWG, MAAWG, Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group, that meets in San Francisco. It's got all the anti-spam people, very techie, very inside baseball on email. You have to be nominated to join the group. I found a way to get nominated, paid the few $1,000s, told the product manager, Gmail and Yahoo, that I was going to be there for the MAWG meeting. You happened to be there. When they said yes, why don't we grab a few minutes? I booked a flight and basically made the whole trip happen simply around that. We chatted for 10 minutes, and the product manager email said, yeah, the recommendation you guys made, that made sense. We're rolling that out. If it's not already out, it'll be rolling out in the next week. And Yahoo
that whole time they were working on it.
Yeah. No, it was all
boy, that probably would have been a lot more relaxing if they had said something to you.
It would. Yeah. No answers. I sent a couple follow-up emails again, no answers. And so it was this get on a plane, show up, get the FaceTime, never give up. And even Google and Yahoo might be willing to change something if you have a good reason and you make a case.
What did you take from that story? What did that teach you?
Don't ever quit. Don't ever quit. No matter how dark something seems, there's always a path, right? If you can't see it right away, kind of triangulate, ask different people for advice. But if you've got something worth keeping, worth saving, don't ever quit.
Awesome. Now, in the marketing tech world, you're deep into it. And there's probably a bunch of stuff on your roadmap. Are there things that you guys need or want done that other people could go and build? Things that you're not giving away roadmap. What should people be doing to help the industry? What does your industry need?
Yeah. There's a lot of MarTech companies building lots of interesting things. We're building some of them. We have a bunch of partners. There's an ecosystem, everything. So we do the content personalization inside of emails. There's companies that use AI to build subject lines. There's cross-channel deployment platforms. There's data management platforms, CDPs, whole acronym soup. All that is great. I am curious about this next wave of companies, Web3 companies that are using blockchain. And when you start to really think about it and go deeper and deeper, these things have the potential to be very disruptive to the old way of doing things. Even Snowflake as a company, which is the most highest performing SaaS company in history. If there's an alternate way of thinking about that, about data management, that could disrupt entire industries. So, and I think older company, we're not even that old, but we are so deep into executing on things that we're doing. It takes a special team to go deep on the stuff and start thinking about it. So this is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs to think about new architectures, new ways of building things that, and to think about how does this better the customer's experience, the customer, the market, or whoever you're serving. And not just technology for technology's sake, but does this enable new types of things that weren't possible before that are really valuable? So that is a hugely interesting area.
World is interesting. I mean, I think for people who haven't heard the phrase yet, Web3 is probably one of the most incredible ways of kind of rebranding what has been historically blockchain or crypto and broadening it out beyond currency.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of taking ownership where it's centralized with a company and distributing it out so we can have these projects that are owned by a lot. I think it's really open source with the ownership model. What's interesting about it is, I think we're seeing this real question of social organization, because ownership is really around how humans organize, right? That's why we, if you're capitalist or socialist, whatever it is, it's around what motivating systems. It's not about who gets rich. Everyone dies eventually. It's long-term, how we are organizing as humans to achieve social goals. So I view Web3 actually as a huge social experiment. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch, seeing how much we can change the ownership concept of how businesses are done and whether that works. And there may be places where it works really well, and maybe in Movable Ink land, you need a more traditional corporate structure and leadership team to navigate effectively. So this is an interesting moment. I think a lot of philosophers for centuries have been talking about different ownership structures on a kind of economic level, and I think the web is about to force the experiment through Web3.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different things it impacts at the same time. You mentioned currencies, but DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations, how decisions get made, things like that, enforced in code. That's a different thing. Artificial scarcity in NFTs, owning your own data. Some of the biggest companies today are about accumulating your data and controlling access to it and creating advertising models. That could get blown apart. So rarely does a new thing come out that has such a broad number of applications. And some of those are good and some of those are going to fail. Some of those just that people won't jump onto it. But there's so much experimentation that can happen here that it's exciting to look at and think about. And I wish I had more free time to go even deeper on this.
Yeah, never a dull moment in the innovation game. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Every time you think we're at a tail end of some innovation curve, it changes.
It does.
The whole landscape changes. You've been in the New York tech community for a long time. I think we met well over a decade ago, and it was the predecessor to Movable Ink. And you've been around. We both watched the community change, and we're not the old guard. I know I said this on the pod before. People have a short memory in the tech community because the community turns over so quickly. But there are folks in the 90s doing stuff in New York. I don't know if we're third or fourth or fifth generation, but we've been in it for a little bit now. One of the interesting trends, I think that I didn't see coming as much when I was a younger entrepreneur in VC, but now kind of getting to be the older side of the game, is that there are people who want to graduate from the startup community, right? There are people who don't want to be classified as a startup founder anymore. They want to be classified as an executive of a more mature company. Where are you finding your peer support now? How are you thinking about yourself as an executive? You're no longer a scrappy startup guy. You have a 400 plus person organization. That's not even small, right? That's how do you think about that psychological shift? Anything to impart on what that transition's been for you?
Yeah, it's not an easy thing, and many CEOs don't make that jump between being the founder, person coming up with ideas, to establishing systems that help you scale. So creation, founders are usually pretty good at that. And, if you've been successful and got to certain product market fit, you're probably able to synthesize lots of different things, put them together and come up with an interesting idea. Often you don't find the same set of skills in like scaling something. So you have to realize, look inward and look at what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. And so, I looked internally and said, I need to complement myself with a good team that does this stuff really well. And so our sales leadership, our customer success leadership, the finance function, the legal function, and, where do I get my energy to? I've told my senior team, really just introspect. What are you really good at? Where do you get your energy? And where does the company need you right now? And ideally try to find a mix. Sometimes you'll have to do stuff that doesn't give you energy. You have to kind of grind through. There's moments like that. But for the long term, to try to put yourself, kind of be self-aware, because we can complement you, right? I've complimented myself with our leadership team. The way another executive is really good at certain things, they can find a lieutenant who does something really well, or a peer, or even me as a sounding board, and to just be kind of self-aware, and you get to shape your own career, right? Like there's an opportunity, you've earned the right and gotten things to a certain point, and you can shape the team the way you kind of that best serves the company, but also serves your energy and what you're good at.
I love that. Now, you moved around a lot as a kid, if I remember. I know you started off your life. I think you were 8 when you moved to the States from India.
Yeah, I lived in 3 different places in India. So my family's South Indian, but I was born in the north in
Wow.
Jamshedpur. Lived in Calcutta for a couple of years, and I think there was something. I think there was a better business opportunity. My parents told me about. They moved us down to Madras, thinking, "Oh, we're out of this like tough situation." And then a drought hit in Madras. And when COVID started, I was asking my mother for some advice, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I kind of remember that." And I'm like, was it a couple months? She's like, no, it was 2 years. The drought was 2 years. So there was water rationing. And she told me stories that we'd get a slot in the morning and you would get a ticket and you'd have to use it in the morning at like 3 or 4 a.m., get up, stand in line, be on other people, collect all the water that you get for the day for drinking, for cooking, for bathing. You kind of have to get it. If you miss it, you're
That
out of
sounds
luck.
stressful.
That window. Yeah. So she was afraid of like not waking up on time.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to do that. And then she told me this recently. I didn't even know this back then. The mayor of Madras asked everyone to put buckets on top of the building to collect rainwater when it rained. And if they walked around, and if there were buildings that hadn't done that, they would shut off the electricity. So it was a stick. It was not a carrot. It was a stick to say, you do this in order to help us all survive. And those were good stories and lessons when COVID, the pandemic started. And I shared that story with a company, not even thinking at the start that we were going to last this long, right? I thought maybe it'd be over in a couple of months. But bounced around 3 places, came to the US, lived in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. By the time I was in 8th grade, I'd been in 9 different schools.
Wow.
So I think that constant change, I hated it as a kid, going from one place to the other, and then finally settled in high school for 4 years and college. So for a while, I never lived in a place longer than 4 years. And New York's been like a nice place to kind of settle down. At the same time, the thing that you didn't love then, I crave adventure. I crave like wanting to see new places. And I think it's also made me really adaptable. I'm really comfortable with change and chaos and things changing up around me. And I have to remind myself that not everyone went through those same experiences and not everyone is comfortable with that level of change. So it's a weird kind of formative thing as you go through as a kid that makes you who you are, and a little bit becomes your superpower. Realizing that's not a normal thing, and that's not how most people grew up.
And I assume that's helped you in entrepreneurship.
It did, yeah. I wasn't really afraid of. I was more afraid of not doing something meaningful to me. I had to go create something, and it was my first job after college. I did a couple of internships, and college was fun. You get to wax on philosophical ideas and topics. And my first job out of school, I was at Cisco, which is a wonderful company, but it was a big company in the late 90s, and there was a new campus building popping up every month, and I felt like a drop in a bucket. And within 9 months, I'm like, I'm miserable. This is not for me. Is this what like working is like? And I don't think I hadn't been exposed to startups. And the first one I did after that, I quit my job within 9 months. Changed my perception. And I'm like, there's an energy here. This is what I'm meant to be doing. And I, did that startup for a number of years. And I realized I was going to have to go start something myself. It was just too exciting to go figure out. It's like putting the pieces of a puzzle together to go figure out to build something that had never existed before. And
you've pulled it off.
Yeah.
Pulled it off. With all of your success and the journey you've been on this for more than a decade now. What's the most important you think you've learned as an entrepreneur? What could you leave behind? A bit of wisdom.
Yeah. This may not be relatable to a lot of people, but I was a geek. I read a lot. We moved around a lot. Straight A student, good at math and science, that kind of stuff. I was not an athlete. I was a scrawny Indian kid, probably a year younger than the other kids in my grade, and I looked like a 11-year-old when some of my classmates looked like 17 or 18 years old. So, I couldn't play on an athletic team and be competitive. But somehow I shot up later in like late high school and then in college. I got into martial arts in a bigger way. And there was a internship I did in Pratt & Whitney. This is like mid 90s or so, and wanted to go to the next level and somehow found this school. And this is when, if you're a UFC fan now, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu first started like making its, Hoist Gracie, saw that, saw all the things were happening, and found a school that taught Muay Thai, some of the Filipino martial arts. It was a Jeet Kune Do school. as well as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The teacher had worked with Hoist and Horion and the rest of those guys. So at some point, he's like, hey, would you like to train for a fight? I'm like, sure. And got into this thing, and we started training for, it was not called MMA yet, didn't have the same rules, but shoot fighting rules, which is essentially like kickboxing rules plus jiu-jitsu, and you can do grappling. So 4 hours a day after my work day, I'd eat a little bit of dinner, go train, get my butt kicked, go spar someone my weight. It was like 160 back then, and then someone 180, then 200, then 220. And you learn a lot, right? It scared me. It scared the crap out of me when I first started doing that. But I think for a kid and for a lot of engineers and types of people who think there's always an intellectual answer to something, sometimes I think it helped me psychologically toughen up and push through pain, push through difficult moments. And once you've done that, you realize, even if it's been many years, you've done it before, you can get back to that place. And so, I think doing something that is different, a different type of challenge for you and pushing through is worthwhile. And the thing that scares you a little bit, because you can draw from that store and know what you're really capable of. And that mentality has gotten us through difficult times at Movable Ink.
Did you win the fight?
The fight got canceled, unfortunately. There was some sort of licensing issue, like
that might have been great. It sounds like for the better. For the better.
Yeah, I mean, leading up to it, like you get the nerves, and it was the sparring stuff, but and then it took me a while before I kind of got back in there, and then I was older and kind of gotten out of it. So as a hobbyist, then I kind of dropped in and out. But it was just a really cool. There's so many things when you're sparring people. You also learn a lot. That Mike Tyson quote: "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." That is true of startups. It's also true that once you get comfortable, when you start sparring with like a new person, you can kind of tell because they seize up a little bit. There's heavier breathing, their muscle, and you get a read on that after you've been doing this for a little while. And suddenly that big bodybuilder type of guy, you're like, wait a second, he's a little freaked out and he's tiring out because he's breathing heavy. And if you keep calm and kind of move around, you can control the pace of the fight, and like you can see things happening before they do. There's all this like stuff you start to be able to read about fast moving situations and even, the psychology of the person across from you.
Vivek, thank you for being on the show today and sharing a lot of wisdom with us. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Great to catch up again, Mark.
Awesome having Vivek on today. I've known him for a long time, but until today, I didn't know he was on his way to being an MMA fighter at one point. I love seeing him and Movable Ink crush it, which they have been for a very long time. This is where I ask you to help the podcast. If you like what you heard, give us a like or a 5-star review or share with a friend. That helps people discover what we're doing here. You can find me on Twitter at MPD. And to hear more of my conversations with innovators, subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, or any major podcast platform. Just search for Innovation with Mark Peter Davis.